This looks awful. Wait. Okay. All right. Good morning. When we start, before we start, are there any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints? Okay. You guys are so chatty today. Okay. So, hold on, I'm trying to. Okay. All right. So today is chapter 17 and 18. And it's kind of a little bit gloomy, right? 17 is kind of gloomy, but it is a continuation. Well, it's another burden that's Isaiah's prophesying, but now to Syria, right? So Syria, and then we're going to see some of those things mixed in for the house of Israel because they are neighbors. So last week was Moab. This week is Syria. If you look at the map, let me see if I can quickly pull up my map, and I will screen share it super quick. No, I sent you guys the map, but just in case. Oh, that is whatever. Okay, it's a little pixelated, but I didn't think of that. Okay, so last week we were talking about things that are going on right in here. Okay, so today we're talking about things that are happening up here. So Aram, or yeah, I think that's how you say Aram.
There's a different.
That is another word for this. So we're still considered to be in the Transjordan area, but we are up here in, oh, thank you, JJ. We are going to be up here north. So the reason that this is significant is that it's because we are still in areas where we are, the children of Israel, the house of Israel is still kind of meshing with these people, right? So they weren't just perfectly assigned to these bordered areas, remember? Because there were people, the house of Israel was down here, and they built a lot of these big cities, and now we have Damascus up here, and there are people of Israel from here. So that's the area, just for your reference. So we're going to be up north, but it's closer to where Syria is. And if you remember at this time too, we talked about in a few chapters ago, Syria at this time when we're talking is actually, they have that alliance with Ephraim, the northern tribes of Israel, as a protection from Assyria. And so Isaiah is going to talk to him about that and tell him, hey, don't do that. Okay. So that's what we're going to do there. Can you guys see me again, or is my...
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So this chapter 17 is a warning to the entire Transjordan area. So that area I showed you, it's a warning to that entire area because it's not just intermixed. That's just normal. Okay, so it says the burden of Damascus. So Damascus, and I had to look this up because for some reason I cannot get it in my brain, but Damascus is the capital of Syria. So this is, he's aiming it to the capital, but it is for this entire area, okay? So it's the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Pretty gloomy. But let's find out why, okay? Because there's a reason that God is inflicting this. There's a reason that this is what's going to happen. So verse 2, it says, the cities of Aroer are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. This chapter, I really appreciated Gileadi's translation, for those of you that are using that book. His translation says the cities of Aroer shall lie forsaken and become places for herds to recline, where no one will disturb them. They're going to become, they're going to be emptied of people, and the livestock that lives there, they're not going to be bothered by people. So the people are gone. Yeah. And this yeah. Let me go to the next one. So the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim. So this fortress they're talking about is the alliance. So this is the alliance that is the Ephraim and Syria to protect them from Assyria. And remember, they tried to get Judah on board, and Judah refused. And so then they tried to collectively get together and get a battle against Judah, but they're going to get in trouble for it. Okay, so when we read this same verse in Gileadi's translation, it says, when Ephraim's defense comes to an end, so shall the sovereignty of Damascus. Sovereignty, I did look it up because I like the more simple translations or definitions, but it's the power or the authority to govern yourself. So they're going to lose that, and they're going to lose it at this time to the Assyrians. And we'll see that. And it says, and then this is really interesting, and it says, going back to the King James Version, it says, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. Gileadi's translation, as with the glory of the children of Israel, so shall it be with Aram's remnant. Okay, Aram again, Syria's remnant. So what does that look like? So at this time, what is happening to the house of Israel? They're being attacked. They're being put in slavery. They're being scattered, right? But then there's the promise that they're going to be gathered again. So this is the same future of the Syrians, okay? And this is Gentiles. So they're going to be scattered, and then eventually they're going to be gathered with the house of Israel. So that's what he's saying here. So verse 4, it says, and in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. Okay, they're going to be weakened as a people. That's what this is saying. And it starts at the head or in the leaders of the people, okay? So when they start to become lean, I mean, they're becoming skinny. They're becoming weak, okay? Nowadays, we want to be lean. Back then, it was more of a desire to be fat. So we read something like this before, and I in everything that I've read, I didn't see this parallel until I was looking for something else, and I was like, oh my gosh, we already did go over this. And so I found a parallel. So if we go back to Isaiah chapter 10, we're going to see chapter 10, it's in verse from 16 to 22, and I did write that quote right here. Let me copy and paste it if I can quickly find it. We're going to find that this parallels verses 4 through 11 of this current chapter, okay? So starting in verse 16, and this is in chapter 10, therefore shall the Lord of the hosts, send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. Okay, so this is to the Babylonian king, right? So he's saying that I'm taking you guys down from the head. You're going to suddenly be like withering away. And then as we continue to talk about the harvest, we're going to see this one is going to say, this one says, and shall consume the glory of his forest, and its fruit fulfill both soul and body. And then it's going to just be, here's verse 19 in chapter 10. And the rest of the trees of his forest shall be few, that a child may write them. So we're going to see this parallel right here. Let's go back to chapter 17, verse 5. So let's see what happens, what this parallel is looking like. And it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn, and reapeth the ears with his arm. And it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. I'm not sure if that's how you say it, Rephaim. So so the valley of Rephaim, it's a fertile vale or a valley northwest of Jerusalem, and it's noted for its abundant harvest. Like it was super abundant. Historically, see, I think I have the reference right here. Historically, in previous wars that Israel had with other nations, these nations, the Philistine armies, they would camp out there and they would continue to graze there because it was so fruitful. That was their choice place when they were setting up a war against Israel. So very fruitful, can support an army, right? So abundance. This is saying that there is a harvesting that's going to take place or is taking place at this time. A lot of things are ripe, and after they are gathered, and say it's by, the evil army or whatever, there's only a few left. Remember how we talked about when things really start happening, or so back in chapter 10, verse 19, it says, and the rest of the trees of his forest shall be few, that a child may write them. If I'm not making sense, just feel free to ask questions. But remember, there's only going to be like 10% of the population left, right? And this is going to be the chosen or the righteous few that God has to work with to build Zion, or to really establish Zion for when the second coming is coming. This is going to happen it's a couple hundred years after Isaiah's time, and then it happens again in the latter days. Okay, so this is, but we're going to talk, okay, hold on. All right, verse 6. Yet, and this is chapter 17, verse 6. Yet gleaning grapes, and those mean the things that are left by the harvesters. Okay, this is just the remnant that's remaining. It says, yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in the utmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord of Israel. So just a few left. So just like with Israel, there were only a few left when the scattering happened. And so verses 4 through 6 are talking about Israel will dwindle, and so will the nations of the world. And like Israel, only a remnant will remain to later be numbered among the Gentiles who will turn to God and forsake their false religions. Okay, that if you want more information on that, the Old Testament manual that I showed you guys that I'm using, the brown one, page 156 has more information on that. But we talked about in Isaiah 10 how with those verses 16 through 22, saying that, so Babylon starts getting destroyed, remember? And these people don't know where to turn. They're looking for a new ensign. They have no idea where to turn to. They need something. Babylon's gone. And so they start turning to God. They have to turn, and they start turning to God. They don't have to, but they choose to, because they don't have Babylon to follow anymore. And it's like, oh, let me see God. So then from this point, we have verse 7 in chapter 17, and it says, at that day shall a man look to his maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. And he shall not look to the altars, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. So they finally look away from their idols. Babylon is destroyed, so they're starting to turn to God. Okay? This happens a couple times through history. I mean, we see it over and over in the Book of Mormon. We see this happen throughout the Bible. I mean, remember, like the children of Israel, how righteous they are, and then they fall away. And then they try to be righteous, and then they turn wicked. It's just something that happens over and over and over. The natural man has a tendency to take over. But at this time, these remaining Gentiles turn to God, look away from their idols. And this is saying, when it says in that day or at that day, it most likely is referring to the latter days. So we're seeing Gentiles turning to God. I mean, we have seen that with the restoration of the church, right? So the house of Ephraim is being established and gathered with the restoration of the church, and then we take the blessings out to the world. Okay, so verse 9 through 11. Now we're going to talk about a harvest that will cease. Okay, so verse 9, in that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bough, like a bough of a tree, and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. Verse 10, because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength, therefore thou shalt plant pleasant plants, and shall set it with strange slips. Gileadi's translation says on the last line, therefore, though you plant choice crops and sow hybrid seeds. So he calls strange slips hybrid seed. Okay? Verse 11, in that day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow. Okay? Gileadi, the last line in that same verse, yet shall the harvest vanish in a day of diseases and incurable pain. We're starting to see a day of disease. Where are our hearts? So if we remember, the kingdom of God is symbolized as a seed. So if we think of these plants that are growing as the seed planted, it becomes the kingdom of God, right? So we're building the kingdom of God as a church. So those who have made covenants with the Lord, with the church, restored church, and have not remembered him or were unfaithful will not be part of God's harvest. Okay? They will perish. Only a small percentage of the church, those who are faithful, will be left, and that's because of the choices of those covenant members who have not remained faithful. Okay? But why do they vanish? Because verse 10 in the beginning, it says it, you have forgotten your God and your salvation, and has not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. Which is interesting because in the day of grief, desperate sorrow, diseases, incurable pain, however it's translated, don't we really need to be standing sure-footed on the rock of our strength? So it's interesting that that's what we forget. Those covenant members, or those members who made the baptismal covenant, that's why their harvest comes to naught. It's like the parable of the seeds, and where the seeds fall and what happens to those seeds. Any thoughts on that?
Amy, this is way off, but my grandmother used to always, when she'd get a cutting from somebody's plant or peony bush or something like that, she'd always say, can I have a slip of that? And I always wondered, where did that come from? I just thought it was an old pioneer thing, but it's a cutting from something else. And I didn't really, but anyway, it was just fun for me to hear that was written in the Bible.
Okay, so what's really cool about that, Patty, is that gives me a new perspective, because when you say set it with strange slips, strange usually is referring to Gentiles. So if you're saying you're nourishing it with the Gentile cutting,
yes,
you go to Jacob 5, and you're talking about like how everyone's like growing together. That's a really cool, like, I'm glad you brought that. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have another comment on that? No? Okay.
Amy? What? Oh, in the book that I have for Unlocking Isaiah, is slips or small shoots or buds cut from one tree or plant to graft into.
Okay, so you're graft.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I read too.
Okay, so yeah. Hey, Mason? Sorry, the baby got marbles and is throwing them on the floor. Okay, so yeah, I like that. Write that down. Then that just makes Jacob chapter 5 so much more important, don't you think? I wrote down this quote. Hey, Jace, will you hand me my Book of Mormon? It's right in front of the music stand under that other book. That one. So I wrote down a quote, and it was from, I want to say Joseph Fielding Smith, but it was about Jacob 5, and it's so pertinent to this when we're talking about, thank you, honey, when we're talking about the scattering and gathering. So Joseph Fielding Smith, he said, one of the most interesting and significant parables ever written is that revealed to Zenos and recorded in Jacob 5 in the Book of Mormon. It is a parable of the scattering of Israel. If we had the full key to the interpretation, then we would have in detail how Israel was transplanted in all parts of the earth. And I think that's super interesting because remember, we're talking about how these people of Syria are going to have essentially the same fate as the house of Israel. So they're also being transplanted. That's really cool. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments or anything on those? Okay. So to sum that up, verse 11, the end of that is the consequence for those who forget God and do not remain mindful to the rock of thy strength. Okay. And I love that phrase of rock of thy strength. I love it. Okay, so verse 12. This is Isaiah's conclusion. He's going to conclude that any nation, okay, that speaks out or roars against the Lord and seeks to plunder his children will be destroyed. So let's talk about that. Verse 12, woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. Verse 13, the nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. So this is, these two verses are really interesting to me because, first of all, when you read it in Gileadi's translation in verse 12, woe to the many peoples in an uproar who rage like the raging of the seas, tumultuous nations in commotion like the turbulence of mighty waters. It made me wonder, because Dee, I've been thinking a lot about your question about, is there going to be like physical war? Are we going to go to battle? Are we going to be fighting, or is it just going to be a spiritual thing? And I don't know, but that one makes me wonder if, like about a World War III, if the nations are in commotion, that to me says fighting, right? And I was thinking historically about all the scriptures and how, I mean, everybody has to, like, even when the children of Israel were coming to take their lands around Jerusalem, they fought. They killed people. Nephites and the Lamanites, even if it was righteous, they had to fight, you know, and they had to go to battle. And so I'm still wondering, because it doesn't specifically come out and say that about God's people in the latter days to do that, but it does, because it does say that God's power will scare them and get rid of them. But I don't know, we'll talk a little bit about more of that in the next chapter, but I thought that was interesting. So in verse 13, the rushing of many waters, we talked about that parallelism being, this is from Isaiah 8, verse 7, that's what he called Assyria. Remember that they were the roaring of great waters, and they were the floods that were to come in and wipe out the children of Israel, right? So Assyria is also parallel or a parallel or a symbol of the world. So nations may roar or speak out against, like Assyria or like Babylon, like the world against God. But when he rebukes them, when Christ rebukes them, they will flee. They shall flee far off and shall be chased as the chaff. They're going to be scattered. They're going to run away. They're going to be scattered. They're going to infiltrate other nations. Okay? Let's see. Verse 13. This is from Ludlow. It says, the parallelism in verse 13 with verse 2 of this same chapter indicates that it is not the powers or armies of men that will send the people fleeing away, but the power of the Lord, the promise of special protection. So again, that's what I'm like, okay, so how is this gonna happen? Is it gonna be truly a show of God's power, or is it gonna be a physical battle, or is it both? You know what I mean? So that's what I wonder. But so 13 is parallel to verse 2. This whole chapter is a chiasm, but I haven't been going into chiasms as much unless I feel like it. Okay, verse 14. And behold, at eventide, in the evening, there's going to be trouble. And before the morning, he is not. So there's going to be trouble in the evening, but before morning comes, the enemies are going to be gone. No more trouble. And this is a portion of them that spoil us and a lot of them that rob us. It's going to be a sudden destruction for those who are against Israel, for those who are against God. Okay? Any thoughts on that? Questions, comments on chapter 17? No? Okay. All right. So, chapter 18.
Amy, what was your rock of thy strength? What was your interpretation of that?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So so those whole verses, I'm thinking like, that's the building up of the kingdom. Like, because even now in these days, we're told that there's going to be a war that happens within the church because so many people are going to fall away and be unhappy with this or that or the other, right? The war will start inside the church. And so I think that's what those verses are referring to well, I think it's a dual thing, but the first part is definitely where there's not going to be much of a harvest of members of the church because so many people are going to lose their testimony or be unworthy to their covenants because they forget God. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted your interpretation.
Okay.
I thought it was just testimony, but that's really the same testimony
Yeah.
of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah.
Because I think when people have problems with a different issue of the church, I don't think they lose sight of Jesus Christ. I think they dwindle in testimony.
Yeah. And then that's when they dwindle in testimony, that's when they're unfaithful to the covenants they've made, whether it be the baptismal covenant or the endowment or the sealing. And so that's when things really start to get bad, right? Because then pride sets in think, well, I know better than the prophet. You know what I mean? So there's different layers to that. But I really, I think that Latter-day focus would be on the testimony and the covenants. Okay, let me take a drink and then we'll start chapter 18, unless anyone has any more questions. Okay, there's one more map that I meant to find and I didn't think about it until just this second. Okay, and I will just screen share on this one. No, I don't want to buy a map. I just wanted a picture. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a picture that I'm thinking of here. So we have, I'll just do this one. Jackson, can you be a little quieter, buddy? Sorry. Thank you. Okay. All right, so I'm going to screen share with you guys. So I want you guys to see right here. So here's the map of the world, obviously. Chapter 18 starts, woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So first of all, according to Joseph Fielding Smith and other translations of the Hebrew language, woe used here is a mistranslation. The chapter clearly shows that no woe was intended, but rather a greeting. So it shouldn't be woe, it should be like hail or or it's something else. It's not a woe. There's no woe pronounced, and we'll see that throughout the entire chapter. So Joseph Fielding Smith, when we talk about the land shadowing with wings, and this was really interesting in Ludlow's book for those of you who are reading that along with our studies. Latter-day Saints are the only individuals who understand this chapter. Because, number one, nobody attributes it to America except the Latter-day Saints. And within the church, we're going to talk about missionary work here, and how the missionary work comes from here. But the other people, they just find it a totally baffling chapter. So in General Conference in 1844, Hyrum Smith said that North and South America are the symbols of the wings. And so I went to this General Conference, and in the same meeting, just a couple, like an hour, I guess, before, I don't know, a speaker or two before, Joseph Smith said, the whole of America is Zion itself from north to south. So that was a major pronouncement. Like, I think that's still obviously important for us to think about and to know, but that was a major thing for the saints to learn and to know. So Joseph Fielding Smith later then says, America is literally in the shape of wings. So you can see here, like, I turn my head to the right, and you can kind of see that there's some wings right here. Do you see that? So if there's like a head here or in a body here, these are the wings. Okay, and I think that's really significant. We are also told there's other translations, or excuse me, other symbolisms for these wings. So the wings represent protection, they represent refuge, and they represent power. We have two, and that was a reference that I forgot to write down, but ether in chapter 2, and it's verses 7 through 12, and in 2nd Nephi, chapter 1, and it's verses 5 through 11, they are told, that's not nephew, it's supposed to be Nephi, sorry. And not right now, we have it where those verses are talking about the Lord saying, this is the promised land, this is Zion, this is where you guys will gather. So I'm just going to turn to the one in 2nd Nephi in chapter 1. Okay, verse 5. This is Lehi talking. But said Lehi, notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained a land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands, a land which the Lord God hath covenanted with me, should be a land for the inheritance of my seed, which would be Ephraim and Manasseh. Remember, so Lehi is from Manasseh, Ishmael and his family are Ephraim. Okay, yea, the Lord hath covenanted this land unto me and to my children forever, and also all those who should be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. Wherefore I, Lehi, prophesy according to the workings of the Spirit which is in me, that there shall none come into this land save they shall be brought by the hand of the Lord. Wherefore this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring. And if it so be they shall serve him according to the commandments which he hath given it, it shall be a land of liberty unto them. And what's really cool about also us being the land of liberty and in the shape of wings, we are the country that offers so much protection and help from other countries or to other countries. So we do so much for the rest of the world. We're not like Alexander the Great, who wants to dominate the entire world, right? We want to help. And that's something that's very unique about us, right? Verse 8 is, behold, it is wisdom. This is in 2nd Nephi. Behold, it is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, and there would be no place for an inheritance. Let's see, there's one other thing I wanted to add here. Okay, let's see. So verse 11 says, yea, he will bring other nations unto them, unto here. He's talking about the Gentiles, latter days. And he will give unto them power, and he will take away from the lands of their possessions, and he will cause them to be scattered and smitten. This is those who are unfaithful to God, who stop serving God. Okay, and that kind of goes back to the previous chapter we just talked about, where God will take you out of your place if you don't follow him, if you don't turn to him. So I think that's significant. It's a repeated promise in Ether as well, in Ether 2. And I think that because of the modern day scriptures, that helps us and prophets, obviously, to realize this is talking about America. North to south, and the very center of that north to south is where the New Jerusalem temple will be built, which is Independence, Missouri. Because I believe geographically, let me screen share again with you guys, and you guys can tell me what you think. Right here, I believe right here is Independence, Missouri. So geographically, like from here to here and here to here, I guess it's the very center, however somebody measured it. So I think that's really cool. Might be a little further south, I don't know. So yeah, okay, all right, moving on.
Looks like Houston to me.
So maybe it's Houston. Probably got it wrong. Whoops. I'm just kidding. Okay. So this is really cool. So we're going to go to verse 2. Okay. Verse 2. So this is the land shadowed with wings of America, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the waters, saying, go ye swift messengers to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. Okay, let's get into that verse for a minute. So, first of all, ambassadors, missionaries, right? People who go out and well, in our case, just share the gospel. So, and they're going to go out in vessels of bulrushes. If you look at the footnote of bulrushes, it says reeds or papyrus. Reeds in the Bible always symbolizes covenant people. So these covenant messengers are being taken in these speedy vessels throughout the world to a nation scattered and peeled. So there's, again, this is also in Ludlow's book, and he talks about other translations. And it's, so other than scattered and peeled, Gileades is people perpetually on the move. And then there's far and remote, tall and smooth skinned, tall and bronzed. And we're talking about the scattered remnants of Israel, of those Gentiles who have been promised to be brought back into the house of Israel if they accept God. So why different descriptions of them? What happens when people join other nations? They marry, and they become a part or assimilated into that culture. I heard a super cool story from Erica Van Dyke, actually, and she didn't give me as much information as I wanted because I don't know if she knew as much, but she has a friend who, he is a Latter-day Saint, and he belongs to the Hopi Indian tribe. And he put together a big celebration. I can't remember what the celebration was. But he sent out an international invitation. She just told me this like 2 days ago. He sent out an international invitation to anybody that belonged to the Hopi tribe. And mind you, their genealogy is primarily verbal, right? And so Tibetan monks showed up to this. This is just, I think this was just a few weeks ago or a month or two ago. Well, had happened before the coronavirus. But Tibetan monks showed up for this festival, and he was kind of confused, and they said, "We come from your tribe. Like we were taken over to Tibet, but yeah, this is where we originate, is with the Hopi tribe, which I'm assuming would be Lamanites." So I don't know the similarities. I don't know enough about either of the cultures to say, hey, there's so many similarities, blah, blah, blah. But I thought that was so cool. Like, wow. Like, again, if we had a fuller understanding of this grafting that we talked about in Jacob 5, man, I think we would understand so much about how many people really are of the house of Israel that we don't even know throughout the world. So I thought that was really cool. Okay, so we're talking about these.
Amy, could I bring something to your attention that caught my eye? In the Institute's translation of ambassadors, in chapter 2, it says emissaries in the translation.
Okay.
And that's really, to me, quite an important difference, because an ambassador really is a representative, whereas an emissary really carries a message.
Okay, I like that. You found that where?
In the Institute's,
In our books,
yeah.
The Old Testament one?
the translation, our translation.
Oh, Gileadi's translation.
Yeah.
No, I love that. You're right, because I was thinking ambassador. I'm like, I don't really know the definition of an ambassador, but they don't really usually carry a message. They usually try to come to
They represent, really.
represent, but they don't. Yeah,
An emissary is much more of an action.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, so then we're talking about the scattered people terrible from their beginning. It's suggested that terrible from their beginning would probably be more spiritually weak than politically scary. Because I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they're all that politically scary. If we're talking specifically about the Israelites, this could also be the Gentiles. A nation meted out. So they're measured together. They're always referred to as a group. Okay, whose land the rivers have spoiled. Gileadi's translation says, whose rivers have annexed their lands. So that's oceans and seas, because in the Bible they didn't use ocean and sea. They always used rivers. And so we're talking about like continents, right? So they're throughout the continents. And we see that from the Book of Mormon, where, they traveled over these seas. We got, Brother Jared and Lehi and Mulek. We did talk about, I don't remember what chapter it is off the top of my head, but there was something about, maybe it was in Nephi. Anyway, but 7 continents. Anyway, if I think of it, I'll find it. Okay. All right. So verse 3, all ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye when ye lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth a trump, hear ye. This ensign refer back to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 10. And we have, in that day, there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. So that is directly referring back to that ensign, to Joseph Smith, to our Latter-day Prophet. I was talking to my next door neighbor. She came over. She needed just conversation. She lives by herself. And and I've always wanted to kind of pick her brain and find out some things about her religion. She's Muslim. And because there's things that I just don't know. And I wanted to kind of compare. One thing that I thought was so significant is we talk about these end signs. We talk about these prophecies. We talk about what is to come. They truly believe that there has been no prophet since Muhammad 600 years after Christ. They don't have a belief in any kind of a savior. They don't have a belief in like washing away of your sins, other than walking around when they do they go to Mecca, what's it called? Anyway, and they walk counterclockwise around this area 7 times, and that's supposed to like reverse time and clean their sins. But there's no symbolism of the sacrifice of Zion coming. And I just think like we have these prophecies talking about these end signs and talking about things to come, so that we know, so that we're aware of what is going to happen and that we're going to be okay, right? So we receive continual guidance. So, but it's saying all ye inhabitants of the world in this verse. So this isn't just House of Israel, this person. This is saying everybody in the world. Listen to when the trumpet is blown and look for that end sign. Joel 2 talks specifically about the trumpet being blown. And Joel 2 verse 1, I'll type that really quick right here, was one of those verses that was given to Joseph Smith, or told to Joseph Smith 4 times by Angel Moroni, talking about the gospel going forth from America, okay? And how that was about to be fulfilled. So we know that this is a prophecy that is already being fulfilled. Okay. Verse 4. For so the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon the herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Turn to, I think I wrote this one down, 3rd Nephi. For those of you who have it, 3rd Nephi, chapter 20, verses 29 through 33. Okay, and it says, and this is Jesus Christ speaking and teaching the Nephites. It says, and I will remember the covenant which I have made with my people, and I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in mine own due time, that I would give unto them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is the land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them forever, saith the Lord. Okay, covenant and sign right there, gathering. And it shall come to pass that the time cometh when the fullness of my gospel shall be preached unto them, and they shall believe in me, that I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and they shall pray to the Father in my name. And then I skipped to, I put through 33. Did I not highlight it? Oh, it wasn't 29. Okay, it says, and I will remember the covenant which I have made with my people, and I've covenanted with them that I would gather them together in mine own due time. That's the phrase I was looking for. I breezed right over it. He will gather them in his own due time. Verse 4, I will take my rest. I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. He's going to watch and allow things to grow, okay? Ludlow has a beautiful parallel with this. Both heat and moisture are necessary. God attends to the harvest of souls by providing proper light and truth, and water or cleansing powers to ensure full development of each person. So he's considering a clear heat or light upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew. So he's taking care of that water and that light for us to fully grow and fully develop. And he's going to wait, and then, like in 3rd Nephi, in my own due time. Okay? plants the seed, sends out the message from the ensign, blows the trumpet, lets people to start to gather. Okay. Verse 5, for the harvest, or before the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches. Okay, so this kind of sounds like, whoa now, what are you doing? There's 2 harvests of a grapevine, okay? 2 harvests. So the first one happens in winter, before the spring starts to wake up the plant. And that's a pretty severe pruning, right? And they get rid of like the older branches and those vines that might not be as productive. My husband did this too. My grandpa's grapevine. It was a severe pruning, and my grandpa kept telling everybody, I don't think I'm gonna have any grapes this year. I'm pretty sure he killed my grapevine. That summer, he had more grapes than he had ever had. It was the first time it had ever been pruned. It was awesome. And so that's a real thing, right? So what we didn't know, though, is that there's got to be a second pruning. So the second pruning of the grapevine happens in the year before everything's ripe. So after the flowers have bloomed and they're starting to show grapes. And it says they start taking out those twigs that might be less productive, or the ones that are shading the other grapevines. So they start cutting out the more useless branches or less productive branches to give more strength and more sunlight to the productive branches so that it can produce more ripe fruit. So this is something that the Lord does with us, right? So he sifts us. We're being sifted. It's like the wheat and the tares, and we're going to talk more about that in just through the last 2 verses, but it's really that sifting. So again, we're going back to, well, I don't know if I would bring Jacob into that, but if we go back again to 3rd Nephi in chapter 20, again, these are super important verses because this is the Lord speaking, right? This is Jesus Christ, and he's using the words from Micah, he's using the words from Isaiah, he's using the words from Malachi and Joel, and he's telling these things that we need to know. And it says in verse 20 of chapter 20 in 3rd Nephi, and it shall come to pass, saith the Father, that the sword of my justice shall hang over them at that day. And except they repent, it shall fall upon them, saith the Father, yea, even upon all the nations of the Gentiles. And it shall come to pass that I will establish my people, O house of Israel. So to more establish his people, he brings out the sword, and he does this secondary harvest to produce more and better quality ripe fruit. Okay. There's a reference. Is that good? Okay. Anyway, here's another reference that I thought was really interesting, especially after reading I didn't write it down. Okay. So after reading the New Testament last year, we're being referenced to Matthew 13, and it's 24 through 43, okay? And I'm not going to read all those, but I am going to tell you, these verses include the parable of the wheat and tares, which is that big sifting, right? Let them grow together, and then when they're fully ripe, I'm going to take out the tares and burn them. And then harvest the wheat and put them in my storehouse, okay? And then it's the parable of the mustard seed, where the smallest seed becomes the greatest tree, right? So that's a significant, so it's interesting to have the sifting and then to have, where is it? I'm not gonna read it, but I was gonna, yeah. One more page. Okay, and then it says, so which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs and becometh a tree. So he's talking about preserving the small fruit to make it grow great, because this is the people that is going to establish Zion to then help gather Judah and get the tribes of Israel over to where they need to go. Okay. There's also the parable of the leaven. So this is interesting too, because then the leaven, it says he puts a little bit of leaven in. She hid 3 measures of leaven, and she leavened an entire batch of meal. So there's just a little bit, it takes care of the rest. And that's truly what it's going to be. Because he's going to preserve those who are the most faithful. Okay, any thoughts or questions on that? I know that was kind of a big thing. No, okay. All right, verse 6. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer upon them, and all the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them. So this is, again, more of that sorting, more of that sifting. In 3rd Nephi, again, I have a whole bunch of references to this one. I want to go to 3rd Nephi 24. Do you guys want all my references to this one, or are you just interested in maybe? What was that?
I said, I want them all.
Okay, so that's one of them, and that's the one I'm going to read in just a second. So 3rd Nephi 22, 7 through 8, and then also 3rd Nephi. These are backwards in if you go in order of scripture, but it's so cool how these just build to, like, just if you read them in order, it's just they build, and there's just more meat to it. It's so cool. Okay, but if we go to the 3rd Nephi 24, 2 through 4, okay, so let me give a little bit more on verse 6, actually. So he says, and they shall be left together. Some people are talking about how just the wicked is going to be left, how just the wicked are going to be left in the mountains, and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls. My interpretation of this is Amy. This is not Ludlow or a prophet. My interpretation of this is that this is still the time when the Lord is doing this first pruning, okay? Those who he leaves to ripen for the last days, we are all going to still suffer the birds of prey, the beasts of the land, and those trials and things that are really still going to continue to sift us and going to continue to ripen us for the building of Zion. This isn't something that just the wicked. I mean, we're all in this coronavirus thing together, and the economic issues that we're having, we're all in this together. It's not just the wicked. And I think that's significant for us to note, because so many people are like, well, I'm righteous. Why am I suffering this? Maybe I'm not righteous. Oh, I'm wicked. That's why no. The righteous do prosper, but it's not always above everyone else if God has an overall plan. That wasn't the right one. So when we go to these verses in 3rd Nephi, we see that I'm actually going to read 22, 3rd Nephi 22, 7 through 8, and he says, for a small moment I have forsaken thee. Okay, so again, everyone's suffering together, but with great mercies will I gather thee. So he has a plan. He has a perfect plan. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I will have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer. Okay, so he's trying us, he's testing us, he's purifying us. So chapter 24, verse 2 through 4, but who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like a fuller's soap. And he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. Then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord, as in the days of old, and as in former years. He's purifying us to make us an offering to the Lord. Read verse 7 back in Isaiah. In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts, of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden underfoot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion. Gileadi translates present as tribute. We become that tribute. The restored church and the faithful covenant people, we are the tribute to the Lord. This description about those who are gathered describes everyone. This is Israelites. This is Gentiles. And what I love that I've found, especially in 3 Nephi chapter 20, is that it talks about, he gives us more of like this information. Like he's bringing scriptures together. This is Christ speaking. He's bringing those scriptures together to talk to us about this merciful gathering, how he's bringing it about, and how much he loves us. I learned a couple things that I didn't really know or hadn't put together. One thing I love about this last verse too is if you read through Nephi, it's 21 verse 6. It says, "For thus it behooveth the Father that it should come forth from the Gentiles." This is the original, the restored gospel. "For this cause that the Gentiles, if they will not harden their hearts, that they may repent and come unto me and be baptized in my name, and know of the true points of my doctrine, and that they may be numbered among my people, O house of Israel." So again, this is for everyone. I love reading about end day things. You guys know that. And what I read the other day, it's talking about this gathering, and this initial gathering of the 10 tribes will be to Zion here on the American continent. And I think it was Joseph Fielding Smith, and he says, how long are they going to be here? He's like, they're going to be here for some time, because they're going to set up their farms, they're going to set up their homes, they're going to receive their endowments, and then during that time, that's when the 12,000 from each tribe will be chosen. The 144,000, they will be protected. The way that they're talked about, they will also be translated. And then they will go throughout the earth, continue the major gathering, and then the Lord will eventually take them to Jerusalem, where they will receive their inheritance in the land of Jerusalem. And I thought that was really cool. Like, it's a process. It's going to be a longer term thing, because the Lord is so merciful, and he wants us all to be a part of it. And I think as awful as some of these verses sound that we've read in these gloom and doom chapters, he truly is doing it because he's merciful and he loves us. Even if things don't go back to normal now for a while with this quarantine, I hope that it's been a lesson for all of us to really be like, oh, yeah, I really should make sure that I'm really paying attention to what the prophet has to say, and I'm doing my food storage, and just those things, and I think that's really a merciful thing, because we do have time, because I felt like with conference, I felt like the prophets, they're not in a hurry, right? They're not like, hurry, do this, hurry, do that, and it's happening right now, but they're saying the Lord has a timetable, and he loves us, and that's what he's doing. I can post, if you're interested, the rest of my references for that last verse if you want. Just to wrap up, I'm going to bear my testimony, but I think this is super exciting. A little scary, because we're going to be tried, we're going to be tested, but how cool will it be to be part of that tribute to presented to Jesus Christ and God the Father as his worthy covenant people, and to be side by side with him when we build that kingdom and we see the return of Zion, the city of Enoch, and we're all in it together, and we see those angels through the veil who are on our side and always have been. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Lots of miracles are coming, guys. Lots of miracles. So, any questions, comments, or thoughts?
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I was gonna say, you guys have so much to say.
What's the Lodlo book that you guys keep referencing?
Okay, so this is this book, Isaiah, Prophet, Seer, and Poet.
Yeah.
Only place and anyone can tell me otherwise, the only place I found to buy it was deseretbook.com. You can't find
No,
it in
it's
the
on
stores.
or you can get it on Amazon used.
I couldn't find it used on Amazon for less than $300. Oh, there was one for $90.
No, I find for like $10.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I couldn't find it. So I bought it through Desert Book with a coupon.
We found a Kindle one for like about 15.
Oh, I can't do Kindle. I have to I reference too many things, but just with this. But okay, so that last one is the second reference I have for that last verse.
It is. Different cover.
Awesome. Next week is chapter 19 and 20.
Ooh, that's a lot.
20 is pretty short.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, 20 is only 6 verses, so that's why. Cool. All right. Does anyone want to offer a